In the case of Anthony and Eloilda Shea, the community has once again been left stunned and embarrassed on how dark familial bonds can get when both partners serve in law enforcement. Anthony Shea is a 49-year-old ex-deputy for Orange County and is alleged to have killed Ellie Shea, who was his spouse and a deputy in the same division. The two have experienced a breakdown in their marital relationship that led to separation. It has been reported that Anthony was being investigated for engaging in an extramarital affair outside of the precinct, which added to the cracks in their marriage unit. Witnesses to the events of the night claim that an argument between the two ensued over Anthony's violent cheating. It got out of hand to a level that Ellie said she needed time apart from him. He said that on the way to the supermarket, he stepped out of the house, but upon his return, he found Ellie on their bed, and there was a pool of blood all over the place. At the first instance, this case looked to be a clear case of suicide gone wrong, but the subsequent investigation proved otherwise. From the very beginning, it was quite evident from the reactions of the officials that something was out of place. When they went there, Ellie was pronounced dead while Anthony was at the scene. What ensued was a thorough examination of the factors surrounding her death. In their investigations, detectives noticed various discrepancies in Anthony's account. Police had been allowed to secure the scene, but Anthony subsequently notified them that that was no longer the case, which raised concerns. As the probe continued, they found out that Anthony was not honest, he did not see her shoot herself, and that Ellie was in fact shot. Most importantly, an audio tape obtained 10 days after the happening documented critical events that would prove important later on in the investigation. The tape lasted about 50 minutes but recorded no sounds of any gunfire, which was surprising. What it instead recorded was the entrance of Anthony into the room, his presence in the room for almost a minute, and after that, he made the 911 call. There was no evidence that he made any attempts to render assistance to Ellie. A crucial piece of information that made the whole situation more difficult to understand, in light of his claims that he had come across Ellie in an unfortunate situation. With the amount of incriminating evidence further engaging Anthony's witnesses, investigators went into detail on the timeline of events. Anthony's manipulation of the scene of the situation was present as he may have created the alibi of utilizing Ellie's mobile phone for sending messages. This mannerism seemed to have provided an opportunity for motive concerning the alleged murder of Anthony's spouse. The community was both bewildered and horrified by the contrast of the shopping trip of Anthony with their children, where he depicted calm, with the violent actions that he is now accused of committing. The stress associated with this case is not in any way limited to the young couple, but includes their two daughters as well. As the news of the case spread there, members of the community joined in sorrow and anger, attacking the domestic abuse, which spreads its poison, not just to its victims, but to families and their children as well. It draws attention to domestic abuse and violence as an issue that needs to be dealt with, even in families of law enforcers. Currently, Anthony Shea has no bond while he waits for his trial. The investigation is still ongoing, as the authorities examine all evidence with the intention of achieving justice. This case has attracted considerable media attention, provoking discussions about the private lives of the officers and what may happen if the services are abused. Such a case reminds us of the entanglements that come with being in a relationship, particularly for people who are in high-performance exigent occupations. That both Anthony and Ellie were in the profession of law enforcement also means that there is an added dimension, since it raises a concern regarding the possible crutch systems available to troubled officers. It also explains the possibility of relationships comprising abuse, whereas the external appearance remains normal. To wrap up, the story of Anthony and Eloilda Shea demonstrates one of the challenges some spouses face: personal conflicts leading to worse outcomes. While the inquiry is progressing and the neighborhood is trying to recover, it is also a sad reminder that domestic violence is a problem that needs attention alongside the resources available for those within such abusive partners. The trials to come are expected to be in the limelight, as many wish to see the outcome of this unfortunate case. April 2017, crime occurred in Long Island, New York, which would attract national attention. Jorge Little Devil Ruiz, who belongs to the frantic MS-13 gang, participated in violence that led to the deaths of 4 people, one being an adolescent just 16 years of age. The story depicts the harsh realities of gang affiliation, where people are greatly inclined to such an institution in an effort to belong. In the course of researching about this brutal crime, we shall tend to the memories of the people who were lost forever. Continue with this discussion by illustrating how these issues are intertwined with crime and gang culture in a case which is actually chilling. Therein lies a tale that bosky and raises some very pertinent issues as regards how crime impacts on society. Background of Jorge Little Devil Ruiz. Jorge Ruiz, a Little Devil, is a member of the notorious MS-13 gang and was involved in a June 2017 Long Island quadruple murder. Ruiz was born in a country plagued by extreme violence, El Salvador, and later immigrated to the US as a child. In this case, the child was seeking acceptance and protection, and so he entered a gang where violence and loyalty came first. The brutality of Jorge's actions earns him the gang name of Little Devil. He also participated in plotting and executing the savage massacre of 4 people, a +16 teenager inclusively. Indeed, his conduct was indicative of the impacts of gang violence and received the national attention it deserved, especially from the security agencies. Eventually, Ruiz was apprehended and charged with the murder and other major crimes. His story depicts the enormous effects of gang life on a person and the society in general, and quite vividly the inner conflicts in gangs. Overview of MS-13. MS-13 is a violent street gang which began in Los Angeles in the 1980s. It was founded by Salvadoran immigrants in order to defend themselves against other gangs. As the years went by, so did the size of MS-13, as well as their territorial expansion, reaching even the East Coast, somewhere in Long Island, to be exact. The MS-13 gang is also known for other dangerous and unfair crimes, like extortion, drug dealing, and other kinds of murder. MS-13 attacks as a way of resolving issues and protecting and/or expanding their sphere of influence is another ordinary practice. The murderous image that the gang has created has positioned it as one of the most dangerous criminal activities in America. Prolific criminal activities have made the gang one of the most wanted gang in America, with law enforcement making arrests, trying to bust the gang out. The planning of the murders. In 2017, Little Devil, real name Jorge Ruiz, and the others of the gang MS further probed into the preparation of the violent crime. They looked for 4 specific persons whom they thought were competing with the group, or would pose a threat to the latter's authority. They thoughtfully organized the attack on the victims and brought them to a remote place in Long Island through deceit. The planning and purpose of the attack reflected the gang's readiness to resort to brutal retributions to keep control. This was meant to send a clear warning to people not to cross MS-13. It was not as if this assault sprang up on them. It was a cold decision taken by the members of the gang who are steeped in the culture of violence. The horrific attack. The gang members on the very day set about their mission of murder with great savagery. They lured the victims away into the forest and then attacked them. With machetes in hand, the people who did the hitting did it without any form of restraint. It was a very disturbing and disordered scene as the gangsters made their dirty intentions clear. They were overpowered within a very short span of time, not sparing all the 4. Such cruelty sent dreadful waves even to those who subsequently heard about it. The incident highlighted the lengths that MS-13 was prepared to go to rid themselves of any opposition. Not only did it lead to poor loss of life, there was also the concern of gang-related activities in the area. Identifying the victims, Jorge Tigre, Juan Carlos Reyes, Nicolas Henao, and Santiago Porpanda. Orellana are a few of the 4 men who pursued the homicide of these so-called remorseless killers. People had one or the other and a story. Jorge Tigre is 25 years old, and they killed him in a very cruel manner that disappointed many. At the age of 28, Juan Carlos Reyes was a very ambitious person with dreams, which he unfortunately did not live to fulfill. At 26 years of age, Nicolas Henao was taken away from her extreme relatives and friends with whom, and still exercises. That makes the murder of Santiago Ponda Orellana all the more pertinent. He was only aged kidding 16 years. For each son, husband, and brother was taken away. so it was a crucial stake for all the families and communities of every victim. The activities of the gang were that of children being wasted up for no reasons at all. Investigation and arrests. Following the crimes, the authorities put in place measures to ensure that the criminals were brought to justice. Evidence was collected, witnesses were interviewed, and the crime scene was processed. In the course of time, the police recognized Little Devil, as well as other members of the gang who participated in the crime. The investigative work shed light on the gang's network and its working strategies. The following weeks were marked with several of the suspects apprehended, which gave the citizens a sigh of relief. The focus was also on neutralizing the group's power and deterring other incidents. The reader got to appreciate the work of law enforcement agencies in tackling gang crime and fighting for community safety through this investigation. Legal proceedings and sentencing. After the apprehensions occurred, the proceedings continued. Charges of conspiracy to murder were levied against Little Devil and other offenders, part of the violent crime syndicate. Applied over the course of the trials were pieces of proof that included, but were not limited to, eyewitness accounts and other forensic aspects used against them. Those present during the court cases were horrified by the details of the offenses, amplified by the court proceedings. Toward the end, Little Devil was found guilty as charged and handed down what would be a long prison period. The sentences sent a message to the rest of the gang members and reminded them that there were consequences for such barbarism. This particular case also took up the talk on why there was gang prevalence and how it was important for the society to help prevent such occurrences in the future. Thank you for joining us as we uncovered the shocking case of Jorge Little Devil Ruiz and the brutal murders that rocked Long Island. This disturbing story serves as a powerful reminder of the dangers of gang violence and the lives that can be tragically lost. We encourage you to share your thoughts and reflections in the comments below. If this discussion resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more crucial stories like this. Your support is essential in raising awareness about these pressing issues. Until next time, stay safe and informed. The tragic case of Jackson Hopper and Ellie Young revolves around the heartbreaking events that unfolded on a quiet afternoon in Shelby Farms Park, Tennessee. Ellie Young, a 22-year-old woman full of life and dreams, was fatally shot by her 26-year-old ex-boyfriend, Jackson Hopper. The two had previously been in a relationship, but the situation between them had deteriorated. Tensions came to a devastating climax on the day of the shooting, marking the end of Ellie's young life and leaving her loved ones shattered. On the day of the incident, Ellie and Jackson met in the parking lot of Shelby Farms Park. The specifics of why they were meeting remain unclear, but many suspect it might have been an attempt to resolve lingering issues between them. It was supposed to be just another normal day, with the park serving as a peaceful backdrop. However, things took a dark turn when an argument escalated, leading to a violent confrontation. At some point during their interaction, Jackson pulled out a firearm and shot Ellie. The park, typically a place where people came to relax and unwind, became the scene of a horrific tragedy. Ellie was shot multiple times, leaving her with fatal injuries. Despite the bustling environment of the park, which would usually be filled with people, there was little anyone could do to prevent the violence from unfolding. Witnesses to the shooting were left in shock as they watched the horrifying scene play out before them. Many scrambled to call 911, reporting the gunfire and seeking help for the young woman who lay dying. Emergency services responded quickly, but there was nothing they could do to save Ellie's life. She was pronounced dead at the scene, and the park was cordoned off as an investigation began. The once serene parking lot had turned into a crime scene, leaving behind the echoes of a young life cut short. Immediately following the shooting, Jackson fled the scene, leading law enforcement on a high-speed chase through the streets of Memphis. Authorities pursued him with urgency, knowing that they were dealing with a dangerous individual armed with a weapon. The chase added another layer of intensity to an already tragic situation, as officers tried to stop Jackson before he could hurt anyone else or himself. After a tense pursuit, law enforcement was finally able to apprehend Jackson without any further bloodshed. He was taken into custody and charged with first-degree murder for the killing of Ellie Young. In the days following the incident, details began to emerge about the relationship between Ellie and Jackson. Friends and family of Ellie were left grieving the sudden and violent loss of someone they cherished deeply. A GoFundMe page was set up by Ellie's family to help cover the costs of her funeral, with many people coming forward to offer their condolences and share memories of her. Described as a vibrant and kind young woman, Ellie's death hit the community hard, especially those who knew her personally. Jackson Hopper's actions not only ended Ellie's life, but also left many questions unanswered. What drove him to such an extreme act? Was it premeditated, or was it a result of the heat of the moment? As the investigation progressed, authorities worked to piece together the events leading up to the shooting, interviewing those who knew the couple and gathering evidence to understand the full scope of what happened. The legal proceedings began soon after Jackson's arrest. Facing a first-degree murder charge, he was set to face the justice system for the crime he committed. The court would eventually hear details about the turbulent relationship between Jackson and Ellie, with prosecutors aiming to secure a conviction for the brutal killing. The case attracted significant media attention, as people were shocked by the senseless nature of the crime. Domestic violence and relationship-related homicides unfortunately happen all too often, and this case served as a tragic reminder of the devastating consequences they can have. As Jackson's trial loomed, Ellie's family and friends struggled to come to terms with her loss. The pain of losing someone so young, with her whole life ahead of her, was immeasurable. In the wake of the tragedy, many of Ellie's loved ones called for greater awareness about the warning signs of abusive or toxic relationships. They hoped that by sharing Ellie's story, they might prevent other young women from suffering a similar fate. Her death became a symbol of the importance of addressing issues of control and violence in relationships before they reach a deadly conclusion. The case of Jackson Hopper and Ellie Young remains a haunting example of how quickly things can spiral out of control when emotions run high and violence becomes the answer. Ellie's death will never be forgotten by those who loved her, and her story stands as a heartbreaking reminder of the fragility of life and the irreversible damage caused by acts of violence. A horrific DV case was reported on February 1, 2022, where a woman named Lizet Salinas Mijanos and her 8-month-old son, George Weingarten, were shot in their residence in Colorado Springs. David Weingarten, who also worked in the same area as a police officer and who is associated with these killings, reportedly shot both victims in their home. This case not only depicts the gruesome nature of domestic violence, but also brings to the surface matters of mental health and trust bestowed upon the law enforcers. As the evening developed, the police received a call reporting a non-violent medical emergency in the said house. When police officers arrived at the scene, they met with a double shooting. Weingarten was at the crime scene, and as if it was grandstanding, he told the officers who arrived at the scene, "I just shot my wife and son." He appeared somewhat disoriented, asserting that he had been unwell before the event, claiming that the wailing of his son was too much for him. He further added that he was filled with anxiety by a series of sounds he had not expected to hear. This saying confirmed that there is likely some underlying mental issue, which is often the case in violent crimes. This is not the first time that the family of Lizet Salinas has raised suspicion about the relationship with the defendant. They seem to have reached out to police about her safety prior to this sad event. But sadly, the earlier warnings did not turn into preventive actions, and this happened. Such circumstances demonstrate the multifaceted of domestic violence, where victims may not be able to avail help even when their families have alerted the authorities. Following the incident, Weingarten was apprehended and later charged with 2 counts of murder in the first degree. He had no bail and also drew a lot of media attention because of the fact that he was a police officer, someone who is supposed to provide for safety and not be embroiled in crime. This case has raised issues on the mental health of the persons who run the law, and how their work environment may affect their morale in the home. Most people in the community were extremely amazed that a person that was sworn to protect would be accused of so many violence-related acts towards his wife and children. The mental dimension of the case is especially troubling. The fact that Weingarten places blame on his infant son's crying for his anxiety clearly suggests the type of emotional state he was in as a parent. It begs quite significant how extreme aspects of mental illness can be functionally active in a person, allowing him to do the most abhorrent of things. This particular case has led some local mental health organization to argue for further measures to be put in place to assist the law enforcement officers, further arguing the need of tackling mental health at the front lines. As it progressed through the court, family members of the victims and community at large had to adjust from the anger and grief that they felt. The couple, who happened to be Lizet and George, were a great loss not only to their family but to the circle of friends and many members of the community. They lit candles in their memory at the vigils and called for action to assist victims of domestic abuse in the future. Events such as these showed the propensity for more violence in the family units, and that violence can be averted before it reaches a breaking point where there are serious repercussions. Furthermore, this case has drawn attention to the systemic issues surrounding domestic violence. It illustrates how victims can fall through the cracks of the legal system, even when their families are actively seeking help. The failure to provide adequate support for individuals in potentially dangerous situations is a problem that requires urgent attention from both local authorities and community organizations. There is a growing call for more comprehensive training for police officers on recognizing signs of domestic abuse and the necessary interventions to protect victims. As the legal proceedings against Weingarten continue, the focus remains on the need for justice for Lizet and George. The community is still healing from the shock of the event, and many are advocating for changes to ensure that such tragedies do not happen again. The case serves as a grim reminder of the potential consequences of untreated mental health issues and the critical need for vigilance in recognizing and addressing domestic violence. In summary, the David Weingarten case is a heartbreaking example of how domestic violence can have tragic outcomes. It underscores the importance of mental health awareness and the necessity for robust support systems for both victims and individuals struggling with psychological issues. The story of Lizet Salinas and George Weingarten is one that calls for reflection, change, and a commitment to preventing future tragedies. For more details on this case, you can refer to the full reports from KRDO and other news sources.